So what we're working out on is the 69 AMX, and you're looking at antiquated suspension already because it was built back in 1969. These brackets were already here. I ended up buying a Dana 60 axle that was already taken all apart, so I had to make tubes. I made my own brackets. I was going to have the shocks on the inside, and I was going to have big, huge tires, but all that got so costly. Some guys are saying, make it so it could go on the street and the road. And these tires were narrower, so I put the shocks on the outside, wider the stance of the shocks, and will give you more lateral, strength. You got the two shocks on the inside. It's just for a straightaway. Some people look at this like my cousin was looking at it and going, I thought that all the bars were supposed to be straight. Well, on a street car, when you have a four-link, they run parallel, you're trying to keep this pinion angle and the drive line from the transmission back to this yoke doing minimal change. Like when people have on a leaf spring and they gas it, and you get traction and this thing moves, you can imagine what's happening with the U-joint angle when it's climbing and stuff. And if you have no leaf springs and you got coilovers, then you have four links. On a standard, GM, they got them going up at an angle like this. They call it anti-squat. They don't want the rear end to go down. But on a dragster, guys would have ladder bars. Real simple. It keeps the rear end from rotating where it's attaching. There's multitudinal or multiple holes, and if you got it adjusted at the bottom one, it's like putting your ape hangers on your Stingray bicycle. You could pull a wheelie. If you had them way back here, you don't have much leverage to pull a wheelie. So if you have a car that's jerking up a wheelie too much, you're losing time because you're just going airborne instead of going forward. So you move the ladder bar bracket further up for less bite. Well, when you got a car that has a trunk location and you don't want to have these ladder bars intruding into the back floor pan, guys made four links. Now if you take these lines and continue them on with imaginary dot, 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 and this one, then you might be moving the instant, or the point of where this leverage is going into the chassis for lift beyond what your frame design is. Some guys have like hot rods to hell. They use the suspension like on a 1969 to 72 C10 Chevy pickup with just long arms, and they still use that in NASCAR. The rear end cannot rotate because it's got U-bolts going around and brackets, and it goes up to a frame, a cross member that's way up in the middle of the car. So the longer the distance, the less change of pinion angle. If you have short little ones and you take a sharp, if your suspension arms are really short, the pinion angle would change really fast. If you got real long ones, it'll take a lot of movement before the pinion's gonna move. But that's okay for NASCAR because they're going around in a circle, and then they got screw jacks on each corner, and they can change the weights. For drag racing or a car that's for the street, you want to go fast in a straight line, then having suspension that is adjustable is nice if you know what you're doing and you want to get underneath there and you want to tune it. But a lot of guys just use ladder bars. This was here already. We had it in here, and the car was even cocked and leaning because these nuts on the spherical rod ends were too close and they were binding up in the bracket. You got to have enough movement and clearance, and up here I'm going to have to grind the bracket a little to allow this thing to move without the jam nut banging into the brackets. So that's what we're working on right now, and we're working on that centering device. Most of the times they'll just have a bar going from, there's a bracket right here, and then it would go to this bottom bolt, and it's just called a track bar. Now if it's at a diagonal, it's going to hold it in place. Then it can't move from side to side because you've got it bound up. It's like making a square with, if you made a square with popsicle sticks, it could wobble. If you push down or push on one side. But if you put a diagonal brace in there, like when you're building a house, they'll put a diagonal in there and it'll tie up corners and stiffen it up. And that's the lightest way to do it. What I'm doing with this thing in the back will really keep it true and allow for a little bit more suspension travel and be able to go into a corner with a little bit more force. You really don't corner much with these kind of tires, but if we have a whole different rear end with different types of tires, and you can make it for street and make it for the track, and then we just switch it out. I don't know what I'm going to do. I think as soon as I get this thing finished, I'm going to be selling it. So there's all kinds of stuff, books that you can buy on suspension and stuff, but one of the easiest things that I want everybody to remember is that you'll see guys on jacked up 4x4 trucks. They'll have these huge curved leaf springs, and they got drive shafts that are already at an angle. They've broken a few U-joints because to turn them big wheels, and they got powerful engines, something's got to move. Either the tires are going to break loose and you're going to be smoking them, or the tires grip and the rear end wants to climb up the ring gear. So the whole housing wants to go like this and U-joints break. So then they think, oh, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to put some ladder bars on it. So here they got this leaf spring that might be this diameter. And it's got a shackle. So as the spring goes up and down, the shackle moves out, and the spring, as it comes closer, is changing the length of the leaf spring. It's got to have a swing shackle to go out further. Well, now you put this ladder bar, and a lot of times they got ladder bars going way to the middle of a truck, and that one's moving at an angle like this, slight angle, and then they got this leaf spring with the rear end on it that's changing angles really quick, and the shackle's got to be kicking out. So when you put this ladder bar on there, and that's only moving this much, and then the leaf spring is moving this much, at one point or another, there's going to be binding. Some guys will have a ladder bar, and they put a shackle on that too. Or you have to put a floater housing on the axle tube, so as this ladder bar is doing its arc, the leaf spring, the rear end is riding on the leaf spring, but it allows the housing to move inside that leaf spring ride. It's this leaf spring holding it up. That's why leaf springs, those went out with the buggy days. If you can go to coilover shocks, you'll see every kind of off-road truck. They got long trailing arms going way to the center where the support is for a transfer case. And then they have a roll bar, and they got real long shocks, so you can have a really nice ride. In a race car, say you got a Camaro or a Mustang, you're only going to have coilover shocks that are about this long, and you got a floor pan in there that's kind of short. You just no sooner sitting down in the chair and the back seats are there, then the sheet metal drops. A lot of guys will gut that all out and make a narrowed rear end, and they'll put ladder bars on, okay? Well, ladder bars with the coilover shock, the brackets on the shocks have to be in alignment so that as this thing is taking that sweeping arc, you're not going to get binding up. So a lot of times, just put stuff together and don't have the spring on it, whatever kind of suspension you're going to use, leaf spring or coilovers, and cycle it through. and see if there's gonna be any kind of binding in your suspension. Or sooner or later, where it's attached to, no matter how big a bolt you have, the bracket's gonna break. Or the car's gonna ride like shit because they're only gonna travel so far and all of a sudden it's locked up and there's no suspension. So what you're looking at here is a really old spherical rod end, Heim joint, his name Johnny joints. They got all different types. If you're making a off-road vehicle, they got them giant, you know, they're called ballistic fabrication, and they make giant ones. But this, you can see this 3/4 inch bolt, it would take a lot to break this. That's going through 2 brackets, that's when you have it in double shear. If you just have something with 1 bracket, you can see how if you tighten it up, a lot of times shock absorbers are just mounted with 1. But when you got 2 plates and it's going in between, you'd have to break both of them. But unless we were talking about how you can get binding in motion. Sooner or later, you wiggle metal long enough, then you'll break it. So these come with a slug, and you got regular threads, and you got reverse threads. So when you get on there, if you make a bar properly, which I didn't do, but I would have flat spots, when you're at the racetrack, you can loosen up the jam nuts, you know, right here. And let's say the vehicle is continuously pulling one way or the other. It's like the rear wheels might be doing the steering, making you dart over to one way. Well, then to correct for that, you might shorten the bar on one side so it pulls the rear end over, and then you might be chasing it that way. Then you'd have to, but you try to keep everything at first neutral, and you make corrections with these bars. And you want it to be really easy so that, you know, if you have like a track jack that lifts it up, you could climb underneath there and you loosen up the jam nuts. Then you'd put a wrench in the middle and you'd be adjusting these bars, and then you got to tighten the jam nut back up. You know, but the way I got them, they're homemade. They're not. I could grind flat spots on them, but I'd have to use a strap wrench or take them completely out and go against each other. It's kind of hard. You just cut bars to length. You got to estimate the width of this and the width of this, depending on where your rear end needs to be located and where the brackets are out. You measure it, then you got to cut the pipe, and then these are already threaded. You slide them up the bar, and then you just weld around the ends. Some guys get really thick bar that has that size hole in it, and they got to tap their own threads going down it. It's just, this is lighter, and then you got the beefy area for it to thread into just in this bung, and then you weld it to the end.
It's all clearance now. The nut was hitting right in this bracket, so the bracket was ground a little bit.
I really don't know if this is the way it's going to set. I wanted my rockers to be level with the ground. We haven't got the engine and the tranny and weight of everything else. Might have to adjust the springs. If that isn't good enough, then I will make a new upper shock bracket that would push it further away. I didn't really want it to have a rake like this. I want it to be level.
Tires are tucked in there a little bit. Now that we've freed up the suspension, we really got to get that Watts link in there.